I will share with you guys the 6 UI design techniques I use most often in my job as a UX designer so that you can add them to your arsenal and save time when you run into following problems. So one of the problems that we run into as designers is basically how to create contrast. And I'm going to talk about what kind of unusual ways I actually use certain techniques to create contrast. Because we all know with like sizing, you can just change the size of a different text element and indicate it's a header, it's a paragraph, etc. But there are other 2-3 ways to actually accomplish this. The first one is actually to use the font weight. Here what you see is that the monthly budget and its value actually has the same font size. But instead of adding the contrast to differentiate them between them, what I'm going to do is I am actually going to decrease the opacity here of the header. I'm going to get them to 70%, and I might even make these with the second technique. I might change their font weight, so I will actually make them bolder, and this alone actually creates the enough contrast I need to differentiate between these two different elements. So sizing is not the only technique I get to use. Now, another thing that sometimes you have to do to actually add contrast is not to change the opacity, but actually to change the background color. So here we have actually our chart here, and the chart doesn't have that much of a background. It has the same color, so it's very hard to see the lines or the values sometimes. I just want the user to focus on the chart a bit. So what I'm gonna do is, as you can see the color here, I am going to, let's say, change the color a bit. So I'm gonna make it just a bit here. And so I can change the color by playing with the saturation, as you can see here, but I can also do it in a different way. If I have a, let's say, a web page like this and I want to change the background color to be different between sections, instead of actually playing with the HSB values, saturation and brightness, what I am going to do is, if I want to lighten the, let's say, the color, I am gonna add some white to it. And it's gonna be really 1.5% or let's say 5%. And let's say if I wanna darken this color, I will add some black to it. It's gonna be really between 1% to let's say 5%. But you can see how even little addition of white and black made this very close colors, but still they make the sections look that different. I believe this gives you much more precision, and it gives me much more precision when I'm actually looking to play with background colors and create a very monochromatic tone. And it is done very precise manner, unlike the HSP where I have to really play with the wheel a bit. So once I do that, I'm gonna get back to the chart here. And another thing I can do here is, right now I am unable to basically see these lines. And the reason I use the lines here is to actually help me basically somehow create a hierarchy between these different lines of values, 6,000, 4,500, 3,000. So when a user actually looks there, I can follow horizontally if the circle value here is 4 to 500. So it is really to set where the user will look. And one thing you can do is, once you create these horizontal lines, and I could basically make them between 5%, very dimmed, to 15%. And 15% is a lot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get them to be 5%, but I am going to make the bottom, the starting point, a bit higher so that the user understands where basically the value of the money ends and the actual months began. So that's a bit better. And for the final line, I want this to be not 10% like the others, but I want the user to focus. So this should be the most transparent one. So this should be around 70% here, yeah. And that looks pretty good. And I am going to basically update these as well. And another technique I can use to actually add contrast, which I use a lot, is the uppercase, lower font and lower opacity. So you can see the header here is the where you shop, and then the grocery is the categorization. What I can do for the sub, let's say info here, subheader as we can say, is I can bold it, I can decrease it 2 pixels, then I can make it uppercase, and then I can get it to be 70%, and then it does look way better. So that does look better. So I'm gonna basically copy with this Option Command C, and I'm gonna paste it here for the other subheaders, and that looks pretty good. Yep. And I think I'm gonna get them to have maybe 2 instead of 4. So let's get these to be 2 because they are too far apart. And this is also another one. So one thing to create hierarchy is basically spacing. And one rule we have of spacing is the distance between the children or parent should actually be smaller than the difference between parent to parent, meaning the external space should be more than the internal space. So here, if I basically tell you, let's make this actually very big. So let's get this text and let's make this, let's say 8. So you can see the distance between the parent, the header of Atlantic store, to the groceries, the category here, is actually much more than the outside of the whole card. And this makes us visually will make the user think, okay, the header is much more closely associated with the whole card than its child. But that never is the logical case. The parent is much more closer to the child than, let's say, the whole group. So what you want to do is actually make the internal spacing between the child and the parent much more closer than the outer spacing. So what I'm gonna do here is, instead of 8, I'm gonna try maybe 2, and even at 2 they are very actually alike, so I can get them to maybe -2, and then you can actually tell, okay, these two things are related much easier. So I'm gonna get this to actually be -2. Yeah, okay, so that is better. Yep, so that is better. And then let's see what else we have. Distance, okay. The final thing I wanted to talk about that I use every day in my basically design job is, I basically want to, whenever I am running into an interaction design problem where I have to actually make a prioritization, I usually have multiple action items, multiple buttons. And here in this card you can see we have add, details, message. But when you actually have so many options like this, between 3 to 5, you are starting to cause a decision fatigue, because the user that comes here don't know what they should click visually without thinking. So a way to solve this problem is basically prioritizing by making, let's say, the most left the primary one. We could make the second one basically the secondary by doing this technique. And for the third one, you could make it the tertiary element. And the way you do that is basically, I'm gonna click on this, I'm gonna make this here, and then I am gonna make the frame actually not have a color here, and I can underline this, and I could make this a tertiary element. But another way to do this is, what will happen, okay, the problem this causes is, what if I have more than 3, let's say, action items? The next thing you do is, after the secondary, then what you can do is actually the hiding principle, where instead of having a tertiary button, what I can do is I can add an icon. And I usually add a more icon here, so I can actually, let's say, get the color here, move myself, and I'm gonna just pick the color there, and I am gonna get this more vertical inside the card design. That's fantastic. And then I'm gonna get it inside the buttons. Okay, one moment. So I'm gonna get it inside the buttons, and then I'm gonna make it to be the most right one. Yes, and that works very well. And for the buttons, I'm gonna basically center them, and that looks pretty good to me. And even then, if I want to adjust the distance, what I will do is I will make this one basically kind of absolute position, so I can play with its position inside the auto layout, and I'm gonna get it around here. Yeah, I think I'm gonna get it around, let's say here is where we are ending, and I can adjust the distance here. So I can just say, okay, this is the distance, and I can adjust the distance by Shift R, create a ruler, get the ruler here. Okay, so maybe a few pixels more, and boom. And yeah, so those are kind of the techniques I use in my day-to-day job as a UX designer every day, and I believe they will save you a lot of time. Now, if you enjoy this video and you want to find out more UI design techniques specifically about color and how to pick a great color choice for an app you are working, watch this video next.